Hi, everybody.
Hey. Hey.
Who's ready to talk about the new frontier of Apple deployment and management? Cool. I'm not, so hopefully this goes okay. So, I'm John Kitzmiller. Some of you may know me as Kitsy. Some of you may remember me from such shenanigans as making a very jelly-filled sandwich yesterday, right about over there where Rich is sitting. So, other than making really terrible peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, I have some other fun facts about me that you may find interesting, or you may not, but either way, it buys me a few more minutes before I have to actually start talking about the thing I came here to talk about, so we're going to do it anyway. So, the first computer I ever used was an Apple IIgs. It wasn't signed by Woz like this one is, but this is the only picture I could find. I used this computer exclusively to play the Oregon Trail. Yeah, all right, applause for Oregon Trail. Right? Always gets you. The first Mac I ever owned was a Performa 476, which I also used exclusively to play the Oregon Trail, although a much more updated version. And Mouse Practice, which at the time I was actually convinced was a game. Does anyone remember Mouse Practice from, what was it, OS 7? Anyone? Yeah? A few people? All right. Cool. Just go underwater. It was awesome. So I got my start in IT actually working in the Apple Store, like I'm sure some of you have. I was doing the imaging of the front of house demo systems, and that kind of triggered my interest. I actually got into it completely by accident, had no intention of ever being an IT guy, and that kind of sparked my interest, and I became more involved. Moved on to do IT for many different companies, doing in-house support, also befriending many dogs, many office dogs. I really like dogs, just for the record. In case anyone's, I thought that would get more like laughter. Thank you. Yeah, so I've spent the past few years going to where all these red dots are and deploying Macs, doing professional services for Jamf Software. That's not what I do anymore. We'll get to that in a minute, but this is what I've been doing for the past 2 years, is helping people, helping organizations succeed with Apple. I also am technically a cyborg. 5 points to anyone who got that reference. Did you?
I'm pretty sure. It was a movie about two kids. I can't think of the name of it now.
I award you no points.
No, it looked like it was from a particular movie I saw recently. That was pretty surreal.
All right. Not even close. But thanks for playing. Earth 2. Anyone remember Earth 2?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? All right. I promise it's the most obscure thing in here. So, oh hey, I work for the Lindy Group now. I've been there for about a month. For those of you not familiar, Lindy Group is a Bay Area, California, or San Francisco Bay Area consulting firm working in IT of all kinds, not only Mac, but I specialize in Mac. One of my colleagues, Elliot, is here as well. Some of you might know him or run into him. I don't think he's in the room because he's a jerk, but I'm just kidding. Elliot's not really a jerk. He's a nice guy. So for those of you who don't know the Lindy Group, you probably know our flagship product, Auto Packager. I'm sure some of you have used that. I had nothing to do with that, so don't thank me for it. I kind of came on after this happened, but it's a thing that we do, so I thought you should know about it. So this talk is called The New Frontier of Apple Deployment and Management. So I've been talking about the new frontier for a while, but I want to take a step back and talk a little history about where this comes from. So JFK kind of used the new frontier as his slogan. This was his, his way of talking about what was going on at the time in the 1960s. What he said in his speech was that we stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of the 1960s. The frontier of unknown opportunities and perils, the frontier of unfilled hopes and unfilled threats. Beyond that frontier are uncharted areas of science and space, unsolved problems of peace and war, unconquered problems of ignorance and prejudice, unanswered questions of poverty and surplus. Now, what does it have to do with Apple deployment? Well, what he meant by that is that things are changing. The new is taking over the old, big risks are being taken, and big advances are being made. So in the context of what's going on now, It's not just about the tech, but it's also about the culture, about business norms, demographic shifts, and where this is all taking us. Now, some of you may be familiar with this quote: "You can't do today's job with yesterday's tools and still be in business tomorrow." This has been in just about every business book since, I think, the 1940s at least. No one can really agree on who said it originally. But I think this really applies to what we all do in managing Apple devices. I hear a lot that Apple doesn't embrace the enterprise. I don't think that's the real problem. I think the real problem is that the enterprise is not embracing Apple. Apple has been very clear about the direction they've been heading, the direction they're going to be heading, and the enterprise seems to be fighting that kicking and screaming. So I think the real problem is in the process. It's not Apple. It's about the process. Really? Nothing? Come on.
More Zoidberg.
There will be. So, I mentioned I worked for Jamf Software. But that's not what this talk is about. This is not a Casper talk. In fact, this is meant to be really more platform agnostic. It doesn't really matter what platform you're using. A lot of my demos and examples are going to be Casper related because that's just the tools that I have to show you. But these concepts can be applied across the board. So don't think that just because I'm talking about Casper, this stuff doesn't work on other platforms, because it absolutely does. So one other thing, I forgot to make a slide for this, but I will be posting every link that I reference in my talk on my blog in about 45 minutes. It should auto-post, so don't feel like you have to try to copy them all down. It's all going to be posted. JohnKitzmiller.com, for those of you not familiar. And the slides will also be available as well. So let's just talk about the elephant in the room here.
You go too far, sir.
Yes, thank you. I actually told Rich he had to come heckle me. So I want to make a slight modification to this. Imaging's not quite dead. There's certain edge cases where it makes sense. I think some people would probably argue with me that they're not quite edge cases. But the thing is, imaging to me is a very outdated process. I see a lot of people taking pictures of that. That's great. So imaging to me comes from a time when most offices looked like this, and some offices probably still do look like this. Hopefully they have people and computers in them, but and a lot of computers people were using were desktops. They stayed in the office all the time. This is probably more relevant to a little later when I'm going to talk about the management of devices, but it's all kinds of works in the same thing. The reality of the situation is a lot of workplaces are starting to look more like this. This is the modern working environment for many people, especially in the area where I live. So I want to talk about a few reasons I don't like imaging, and why I try to get away from it in as many of my customers as possible. So the first one is it's time consuming. And I don't mean it's time consuming to deploy, but it's time consuming to build. It takes a lot of time to build an image, test an image, especially in the traditional monolithic sense. I know many of you are moving away from monolithic into thin imaging, and that's a great step. But imaging still takes some time to build and maintain, and even to deploy, depending on your process. The other problem I have is that model-specific builds, or forked builds, as we've come to call them. For those of you not familiar, that's when Apple releases new hardware, and this new hardware has a specific build that only works for that hardware. So at that point, you have to create two different images. If you're net booting, you have to create two different net boot sets and maintain those until the images or the builds converge again. And that can be quite a pain. So because of that, imaging to me is high maintenance. I also think it adds a lot of complexity to a deployment process. I hate complexity. I'm always looking for ways to make any process I'm working on simpler, faster, more lean, easier, what have you. Complexity is bad in almost every sense, in my opinion. So for the past 2 years and into now, I've been working on helping organizations get away from imaging and move into a more streamlined process, but I never really had a name for it. And a few weeks ago, at a client meeting, the name just kind of came to me, and I threw it out there, and it kind of stuck. at least in our circle back in the Bay Area, and I'm hoping people will start to embrace this, but what I like to call it is Agile Deployment. So what is Agile Deployment? Well, I'm glad you asked. So the definition of Agile is the ability to move quickly and easily.
You forgot break things. Break things needs to be in there.
Break things?
Yeah, Agile is when you move quickly and easily and then you break things.
Okay. So you heard it here first from Rich Troughton. Agile is when you move quickly and easily and break things. So thanks for that. I like that you're really taking this heckling challenge to heart. This is good. It helps fill my time, so that's good. So Agile. Let's take a look at one way Agile deployment could work. Here's where we get into the Casper stuff, but again, this could be used just about anywhere. Now, in this scenario, our user's been sent a computer. Our user's maybe off-site, maybe somewhere. We don't know where. Our user goes through Setup Assistant on this computer they've been given. User doesn't want to use their Apple ID for the purposes of making this go faster. So we've all seen this, right? We all know what this is about. Everyone's done this probably 1,000 times. User creates their account.
I skip all this as part of my imaging process.
You're not doing this. That's the thing.
Users complain.
That's a bummer.
That's what I tell them. Exactly.
Yeah. So at this point, we're going to use a user-initiated enrollment process where the user's been sent a simple instruction sheet that says, go to this URL, enter your credentials, and install this package to provision your computer. Now granted, I work with a lot of tech companies out in the Bay Area, so my users may be a little more tech savvy than everyone else's users. I understand that. But we're going to address that in a moment. So here the user installs the package.
You're advocating jam here? just curious, I mean.
Only because it's the tool that I have to do the demo. Again, this is not meant to be a Jamf presentation or a Casper presentation. I think, I'm fairly certain, someone please correct me if I'm wrong, that the other platforms all have a method of enrolling like this, where the end user can do it. So again, it doesn't matter what platform you're using, as long as you get your user in. Now, in this scenario, we're doing some provisioning behind the scenes. I've chosen to drop a curtain down in front of the screen for the user so they can't see what's going on. Not to hide it from them, but just to kind of give them an indication that something's actually happening. Otherwise, they'd be just sitting, staring at the desktop going, okay, well, now what? I've seen some iterations of this that use a progress bar, which is pretty cool. I think that would be a great addition here, because I actually have no idea how long this is going to take, and I'm really hoping it's done soon, because I've run out of things to say. I feel like we have a question in the back. I'll take a question. That's fine.
I was going to say, am I anticipating something by pointing out that your user opted into going ahead and accepting your configuration stuff and running it?
Yes. Okay. So the question was, are we anticipating something by assuming the user agreed to go ahead and accept the configuration? Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So at this point, the user is going to log in. And because Rich Troughton is here, I've made sure to enable File Vault. So the user is now prompted to enable File Vault.
How did you stop them from enabling File Vault 2 during the setup procedure? Yeah. Because after all, if they're working through Setup Assistant and they're on an actual laptop, they will have gotten the option to enable File Vault 2 as part of that.
That's a good question.
Does it come with a good answer?
Yes. So the good answer I have for that is, we'll get to that in a moment. While I stall for time, no, actually, I'm going to address some of these concerns actually in literally the next thing I show you. And for the audio, the question was, what's the question again? What stops the user from enabling File Vault on their own during the setup assistant?
That's new in Yosemite. You now have that option going through the setup assistant to enable File Vault 2.
Yes.
It's checked by default.
Which is a good thing, I think.
Which
For
people that
it's a good thing for the home user.
Yes,
For the
it is a good
for the
thing
user.
overall, but there is a lot of, if you search for like File Vault on Twitter, you'll find a lot of people cursing that.
Yeah. So that's in between like entries of your blog, right? Yeah. Okay.
First.
So we can see your File Vault's enabled, which is awesome. That's what we wanted. Now, again, this is a Jamf thing, self-service, but I think most management platforms have a way to have the user initiate installations. I'm a big fan of putting most of the things that the user needs here rather than pushing it onto the machines, because it speeds up the deployment time, gets the user into the machine faster. It also gives them a sense of ownership and control of the machine. Even though they can only install the things that we've packaged up and specified, the user still feels like they're in control, they're the one making the choices. And this can actually be a really important thing because it fosters a understanding of trust between the users and IT, and it gives kind of a layer of transparency of what's actually happening. And users tend to like that. So I was going to point out a couple flaws.
Does it give them a false sense of ownership?
Does it give them a false sense of ownership? That's a great question. I think it does give them a bit of a sense of ownership. I think it's definitely kind of a blurred line there. You definitely don't want your users thinking they own the machine and that they can, take it home after they leave the job and keep it and it's theirs. But I think having the user have a little bit of a sense of ownership of their machine is a good thing. I think it makes them want to take care of the machine a little better, be a little nicer to it. I think it's a good thing when it's clear that it's still a corporate asset and at the end of the day, the organization owns it. But I think having the user feel a little more responsible for the machine is a good thing. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Awesome. So we can take this a step further, though, and eliminate some of these issues that have been brought up, and a few more that I'll talk about even later. Using the Device Enrollment Program, or DEP. Just out of curiosity, who in here is using or has used or has exposure to DEP? A little under half the room. Okay, cool. Does anyone not know what DEP is at all? Okay, we got at least one. So the idea behind DEP, I'm glad you don't know because that's my next slide. The idea behind DEP is that it actually enrolls the device for you during the setup assistant. So again, this is Jamf-centric because this is what I have. Jamf was nice enough to loan me this image so I didn't have to make my own. But again, DEP works with many other vendors as well, so this is not specific to Jamf. The process works the same in all the other vendors. So the first step you have to do, or the 0 step, is actually to connect your management server, in this case the JSS, with DEP. That's going to vary depending on the software you're using, so check with your vendor on how to do that. You should have instructions. Once that's been established, during activation, during setup assistant, the machine will check in with DEP. It actually checks in with Apple's servers. And what Apple's servers do is it determines if it belongs to an organization, if it's supposed to be enrolled into management software. So step 2 is it returns those instructions to the machine if they're there. The machine will then enroll with the management software, and then profiles and other packages, settings, whatnot will be delivered to the machine. And this all happens as part of Apple's Setup Assistant. So the user doesn't even have to go to the website, log in with their credentials, and install the package. So I think that addressed your question. If you good with that? The thumbs up? Cool, we're good with that. And Rich, to address your question about File Vault, is I do believe, if not in the current iteration of DEP, in the next one, you will have the ability to disable the File Vault screen during Setup Assistant.
I believe that is in the current version of DEP for Yosemite, because if you look in the things that will block in the Setup Assistant, it from coming up, it does mention DEP having that disabled.
Awesome. So Rich has confirmed that he believes that that's available to turn off in the current version of DEP. So if someone has information otherwise, I'd love to know, but I think that's correct. So again, I don't actually have DEP. Apple makes it really hard to get when you're just a guy and not like a big organization. So working on it. So
Good credit.
what's that?
You need some serious credit.
I know. It's crazy. You got to have like a DUNS number, and it's just a whole thing. I don't have any of those things. I'm just a guy. So because I don't have DEP, I'm not able to demo it for you. But luckily, again, the folks at Jamf have put together a nice video that they've let me use in my talk. So I'm just going to let Jamf show you how this works. And again, this is not a Jamf-specific thing. This will work with many other management frameworks as well.
This video shows the user experience for setting up a Mac that's enrolled.
Can we get that
using
turned up? Is that
Apple's
okay?
device
It's really quiet.
enrollment program and the Casper suite from Jamf Software. The user
I'm going to see if we can turn that up and like start it over maybe.
This video shows the user experience for setting up a Mac that's enrolled using Apple's device enrollment program
There we go.
and the Casper suite from Jamf Software. The user sees the Mac Setup Assistant to configure region, language, and keyboard preferences. In the background, the Mac communicates with Apple's servers and automatically applies the pre-stage configuration that's been defined by their IT administrator through the Casper Suite software. Part of this configuration is enrolling the Mac in the Casper Suite's management server. Once the setup is complete, the Mac automatically installs the Casper Suite's self-service app catalog and launches so the user can complete her Mac setup and add additional software, configurations, or content. The device enrollment program, along with the Casper Suite, offers a truly zero-touch deployment workflow for the Mac as well as iPad and iPhone.
All right, so that's DEP in action. Are we all cool with that? Okay, everyone's cool with that. Now, those of you who've used DEP, or those of you who are thinking really hard about it, might have noticed there are a couple problems. I'm going to highlight a few of them that I've found. So the first problem I found is that DEP relies on an internet connection. And as we all know, you can easily go through Setup Assistant without establishing said internet connection. DEP only happens during the Setup Assistant, so if the internet connection is not present, there will be no DEP. So that's problem one. Problem two, probably not as big of a problem, but Setup Assistant doesn't wait for enrollment to complete before continuing. Now, that may not sound like a problem inherently, but depending on how much you're deploying at your initial enrollment, you could actually enter a state where the user is on their desktop and logged in before the enrollment's complete, before everything's been delivered. So they might be expecting to see things that aren't there. And that can cause a user to panic. Even though we know these things will come down eventually, they don't know that. They think something's wrong. They're going to call IT. And we don't want that. Another problem that we have is password policies are not enforced during Setup Assistant. So even though you may be deploying a config profile with a password policy, that policy is not enforced when the user creates their account through Setup Assistant. So this definitely poses a problem in organizations where password compliance isn't just a good idea, but actually the law that they have to follow. So you can run into some trouble with this. The other problem, and this may be a problem, it may not be a problem depending on your organization, but that the user-created Setup Assistant is an admin by default. Personally, I'm in favor of giving users admin rights. I know I'm not universally agreed with on that, but there are scripts to remove admin rights from the user after the fact, and that works. That's what most folks do when they need to do remove the admin rights. So those are some problems that exist in the current iteration of DEP. We're getting there, I promise. There's good news. Yeah, all right.
Where's Zoidberg?
It's coming. There's one more. Yeah. So, coming soon to DEP. First new change that's coming is that Setup Assistant will require an internet connection to continue. You will no longer be able to set up a Mac without connecting to the internet. That could cause a problem for some folks, but it's the only way to ensure that DEP is accurate every time. So that's one thing Apple's doing. Next change that's coming is that Setup Assistant will actually wait for enrollment to complete before it continues. So that means that everything that you're deploying as part of DEP is going to happen before the user completes Setup Assistant. So by the time they get to the desktop, everything they need will be there. Now this could cause a problem if you're deploying a lot of stuff. The user gets stuck at Setup Assistant for a long time. So you probably want to make sure that your deployment is actually as agile as possible. There's that word again. Another good one, password policies will be enforced during Setup Assistant. So that account the user creates in Setup Assistant will now adhere to the passcode policies that you've set. This is a huge one. And the last one, for those of you who do not want your users to be admins, you actually can set up so that the user is a standard user instead of an admin out of the gate. And you can also slip in a admin account behind the scenes as well through DEP. So that's what's coming. I think we can all be happy about that.
Zoidberg!
There's your Zoidberg. Hooray! So need a meme for your slide? Why not Zoidberg? Right? Now there's one more big thing coming this fall that really makes me think that imaging is on the way out. Who said awesome? Someone said awesome? Okay. Glad you think it's awesome. It's coming to OS 10, and it's a big one. It's a big change. I think a lot of you have heard about this. The system integrity protection, right? We all heard about this? Has anyone not heard about this? All right, cool. So the whole idea behind system integrity protection is that certain aspects of the file system, specifically the operating system and a lot of its components, are protected from being written to by anything other than the operating system. So what this means is that a lot of these system files cannot be modified. Apple's kind of pitching this as an unbreakable OS. And as we all know, everything can break. So I wouldn't quite call it unbreakable, but I would call it much harder to break. What was that?
Titanic OS?
Titanic OS, yes. It's unsinkable. Someone will find a way to break it, I'm sure. But this reminds me of another device that we've been using for a while that we don't image. It sounds a lot like iOS, doesn't it? You can't modify the OS. Apps running their own sandbox. So this hasn't been announced. I'm not about to leak a detail, by the way. I saw some people like perk up. I don't have insider information. This is me speculating now. I can do that. I can do that. I don't work for someone that says I can't speculate anymore. It's great. What I think is going to happen is we're not far from a world where the Mac OS is as easy to reset to defaults as iOS. And that, to me, is going to be the final nail in the coffin for imaging. Thoughts on that, Rich Troughton?
I think you need iCloud backup for Mac.
iCloud backup for Mac.
What you really would.
Because
iCloud backup
Yeah.
is what makes this a painless process.
It really would. And I hope that's coming too for the Mac.
Apple might have to build a few more data centers.
They might have to build a few more data centers, you're right. But Apple can do that. They have the power. They have the technology. Yes, there's a lot of changes under the hood. So some of you who are clinging to imaging for dear life may be thinking this. If we don't image, how can we control the user experience? So
Modify the user template like we always have.
that's correct. So as Rich pointed out, you can still modify the user template. That has been confirmed.
We've never controlled the user environment.
Yes, I like you. We've never controlled the user environment. All right, you're my friend. I now award you 5 points that I didn't award you earlier. Sure. Yeah. I asked Rich. I don't even know that. Sorry, sir, what's your name?
You don't want to go there.
No, what's your name? What's your name?
Tariq Sivanen.
Tariq. Oh yeah, I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
I don't even know. What is that?
The first name is from the Middle East and the last name is Finnish.
Okay.
So you didn't want to...
Yeah, very hard to pronounce. I'm not even going to try. I'm sorry.
No,
Didn't mean to go there.
Accustomed to it.
All right, I'm back over here where I belong. So the problem with controlling the user experience is it's usually less about doing what's right for the user and more about imposing your own personal preferences on the user. The thing that I've come to realize, because I used to go into that trap of I want to control the user experience, I want to make everything the way I want it to be. And I came to realize two things. the first thing you can realize is users hate that. I used to put the dock on the left side because that's how I like it. And I had a user come up to me once in one of my early IT jobs with the dog, and like that was just kind of hanging out with me. Wasn't my dog, by the way. Just kind of came up out of nowhere and was like, I'm hanging out with you now. Office dogs are great. The user came up to me with their computer and said, the dock is on the left side. How can I fix this? Now, I don't know if the user intentionally used the word fix, but that to me said volumes. The user doesn't want to change it, they want to fix it. To them, it's broken, it's not right. So that was me imposing my own personal preferences on people, not even consulting them and finding out what they wanted. The other thing I've come to realize is that Apple has a very good team of user experience designers. They will provide a better user experience than any IT team is ever going to come up with. So why not stick with that? It's a standard experience that people are used to. You know, a lot of people that we're deploying Macs to, this isn't the first time they've used a Mac, so they're used to the things being the way Apple provides them. So now we have a question.
Until after 20 years, they invert scrolling and everybody screams.
Yes, until after 20 years and they invert scrolling and everybody screams. But,
Quotes.
but, I'm not even going there. Not even going there, Rich. Smart quotes. The increasing dock. Well, as resolutions get higher, we have more room for apps. Just put every app on the dock. That's a good question. I think the answer to that is the user's going to set the dock up to be what they want it to be. You know, docks are easy to configure as a user. I think it's pretty intuitive. I think the users pretty much know what to do. If the user doesn't know what to do, that's not a technology problem. That cannot be solved by managing the dock for them. Well, it can, but it shouldn't.
You can give them a better first-run experience.
You could give them a better first-run experience, but can you really?
Yes.
You think you can give them a better first-run experience than Apple's user experience team?
Right-click.
Finding the hard drive.
All my files. All my files. It's the new Apple soap opera, right? All my files.
These don't look like any of my files.
Really, the off-the-cuff joke got more laughter than any of my planned jokes. That's awesome.
I'll give you my 5 points back.
All right, I got 5 points. How many points to get a beer after the talk? I don't know. So now you guys threw me off. Where was I? Oh yeah, systems management. Yeah, okay. So managing things. If your users don't know how to change their preferences, that's not a technology problem. That's a user education problem. You should be providing training to your users. That should be a big part of what the IT department does. Not just fixing computers, not just managing computers, but helping the end user better understand the computer experience. Because it's 2015, last time I checked, and I think most of us are using computers most of the day for our jobs, and most of the users we support are doing the same. So instead of just saying, okay, I'm going to do it for you, this is how it is, you should be helping your users understand how to do these things for themselves. Whether that's writing documentation, which Rich did a great double session on yesterday with Vanessa White. If you guys missed that, definitely check out the talk on YouTube, but you're going to miss the best part because it wasn't really in the slides. Best part was me making sandwiches, as it turns out.
That might show up in the video.
Wait, there's video?
Yeah, this all gets recorded. You did not know this all gets recorded?
I knew the slides got recorded. I didn't think there was actually a video of the talk. Really?
Beautiful.
Oh, hi. All right.
Yes, everything with you making the sandwiches
Now
got
it's
recorded.
Okay, definitely catch it on YouTube then, because some really funny stuff happens. Yeah, that might be what I'm known for now, is the guy that makes really sloppy peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So I don't do consulting on sandwiches. I'm not very good at it. So I want to talk about a few things that I think need to go away from Mac management, that I think I'm going to get a little more friction on than the imaging thing, especially from the peanut gallery over here.
You requested
So I did, and it's because I wanted this to be a discussion. Right? This isn't just me telling you how it is. This is me telling you what I think, and I want to hear feedback. So I'm intentionally ending early. to get that feedback. So we're not ending yet. So the first thing I don't like in the management of Apple devices is binding to Active Directory.
You go too far.
Yes, I do.
What's Active Directory?
What's Active Directory?
That's a joke. That was
Now, I got this question before talking about this. Does this mean I think we should bind to Open Directory? Absolutely not. No, stay far away from that.
Also too far. No, I meant binding to Open Directory is just too far. Don't do it.
I don't think you should bind the Mac to anything. That's what I'm saying here. I just use Active Directory as the scapegoat because it's the one everyone uses, or should be, or shouldn't be. What? I should just say don't bind to anything. I'm a big fan of local accounts on the Macs, and that is admittedly probably a symptom of the environments that I manage, where there's a lot of remote employees, there's a lot of offices where infrastructure just doesn't exist. People are working in coffee shops. So when you get into this agile deployment strategy, binding to Active Directory becomes really difficult because you can't access the domain controller. It's also not something that's built into Setup Assistant. So if you want to use DEP, binding to Active Directory, it's kind of tricky because you have to have the user create an account, then you have to delete that account, and that's a whole mess and confusing for the user. So I've also seen, and I'm sure Rich can probably argue with me on all these points, but I've seen sometimes with File Vault and Active Directory changing passwords doesn't quite sync up.
No, that's legit.
Okay, that's legit from the File Vault master himself.
Well, that's also from Apple's engineers. They admit they can do a better job.
Yeah, they could.
It's also not Active Directory specific. It's just that Active Directory is probably the most used.
Right. It's not. It's right. It's not Active Directory specific. It's just binding to directory specific. So again, when I say binding to Active Directory, I mean any directory service. I probably should have changed my slide to say that. Next time I give this talk, I will. It's good feedback. Thanks, Rich. So when you have Macs bound to Active Directory and you have issues with File Vault, password changes can be complicated, especially if the user's off-site, as users often are in today's modern mobile world. I just feel like binding to Active Directory, while it is nice to give your user the same password for their computer as well as their email and all their other services, I think that's a really cool idea. But I think binding to Active Directory creates way more complexity than problems it solves. And that's my opinion. I know Rich will differ with me on that till the end of time, probably.
It does depend on, I will agree, it does depend on your environment.
It does depend on your environment.
If I was supporting a purely mobile workforce that only connected to the network over Wi-Fi, I would not use Active Directory.
Wow.
I don't have that.
Can you say that into the mic for me, please? Because I want people to hear that from you, not me, repeating it. Because who knows what I'm really repeating, right? I could be making up stuff.
All right. I agree. John Kitzmiller does make up stuff. But to go back to the thing that John just asked me to repeat into the microphone, I would agree that binding to a directory service, if you have a purely mobile workforce where they're working from home, they're working, kind of outside your network pretty much full time, it doesn't make as much sense because when are they going to talk back to your directory service? Most of the time when you're handling those password updates and password changes, you're doing it at the login window, and the chances are that you're actually talking back to the thing that provides your authentication service. It's happening after the login window. So it makes less sense in that regard. In other situations, it does make sense where you can, plug into an Ethernet connection where you can get that connection back to your domain controller or the whatever server is providing your authentication service. I think binding there still makes sense because it simplifies like UIDs, it simplifies GIDs, it simplifies having a unified password policy. It really simplifies your requirements for making sure people change their passwords, password complexity, and all this kind of stuff, because all that can be managed from the directory service. But I do agree that in certain situations, it doesn't make sense because it's just more trouble than it's worth.
Thank you, Rich. I agree with you 100%. Just like imaging, there are cases where binding to Active Directory does make sense, or binding to directory services. Well, there's never a reason binding to Open Directory makes sense, but binding directory services make sense in some situations. So just out of curiosity, just a quick poll of the room. Who's supporting users that are primarily in an office every day, plugged into Ethernet, don't really leave, computers don't go home? Who's supporting that kind of organization? So, a little under half.
A mix where that's the primary way that they can work that way. They still take like laptops home, but they're plugged into our network enough that those kind of password changes, that talking back to our AD domain controller, that happens on a regular, smooth basis.
Cool. So just for the recording there, Rich is saying that he has users that do both, but his users are in the office enough that it doesn't seem to cause problems, just to paraphrase there. So I think we have another question over here.
Just a concern.
A concern. All right, I like concerns.
Everybody has some amount of turnover.
Yes.
Remove access to the machine and network resources and everything else if you don't have a directory service.
That is a fantastic question. So I'm not saying get rid of the directory service, for the record. I think having access to services that are tied to a directory service is an awesome, awesome idea. I'm super in support of that. It's the binding the machine that I take issue with. So I should probably repeat that question. Actually, can you just ask that in the mic? Is that okay? Can we do that? So I want to make sure I'm getting these questions right. And I'm bad at paraphrasing.
I just wanted to comment that everyone has a certain amount of turnover in their organization, and without a directory service available to you, how would you recommend limiting people's access to network resources, or even disabling their account on the local machine once they no longer work for you?
Cool. So like I said, I'm not in favor of getting rid of directory services completely. I think they still serve a very important function of tying all of your organization's services to one account. I think that's very important. With the binding of machines, I don't think that's as important. And to address your point of removing access to the machine, I'm guessing we're assuming that this is a situation where someone's been terminated or they haven't turned in their machine, and we want to make sure they don't have access to it. So what I would recommend is using your device management suite, whatever that may be, to send a firmware lock to it. So the firmware is locked, or the machine's locked at the firmware level. That will work anytime the machine has an internet connection. So even if you send that command and the machine's online at that time, next time it comes online, it will lock, and it will be worthless to the user because the firmware is locked. Contrary to turning off someone's account in Active Directory, if they're off-site, don't have access to your domain control, and you've disabled their account, they can still log into that machine until it contacts the domain controller. So, any other comments on Active Directory before we move on?
Don't you have to have Find My Mac turned on to do locks?
Don't you have to have Find My Mac turned on to do locks? As an end user, you do, yes.
And if they're admins, they can turn that off.
And if they're admins, they can turn that off. But Apple's MDM spec has a hook in it that allows you as the administrator to firmware lock the Mac at any time. The user cannot disable that unless they completely unenroll the machine.
Is that the MDM spec or DEP specific?
That is not DEP specific. That is MDM specific.
Once again, this is also not meant to be a plug for Casper, but as soon as you enroll a Mac in Casper, even if you apply no other management to it, you automatically get that lock, wipe, and something else.
Lock, wipe, and
Post a message, something.
Yeah.
Yeah. You automatically get those, and you'll, like, if you go into the inventory, you'll see little icons appearing that have like a little lock and a little prohibited symbol and stuff like that. So just by enrolling in Casper with the MDM management turned on, you get that capability.
You can do that with WWDC devices.
yes.
Yes.
If they're enrolled in MDM, yes, you could wipe BYOD devices. I don't recommend you do it, but you could. And that's not just the Casper read. I want to clarify. That's in the MDM spec, so every MDM vendor should have that support. Even Profile Manager has that support, so you don't even need to buy an MDM product. Looks like we have another question in the back. Do you mind coming up to the mic? Do you mind doing that? While you're walking up, I'm going to go to my next point because it's going to take me 2 seconds to go through because we've already kind of gone through it, and that's messing with the user experience. I hate seeing this. I don't think it provides a lot of value, and it just takes time. Yes, question.
So I'm kind of curious how you would navigate this, like in an environment with having how do you say, a user base of diverse skill levels and sort of awareness. The problem we ran into when the machines weren't bound was that very quickly people lost track of what was their laptop password, what was their password to authenticate to the printer, what was their password to open their email, and all those. And I don't know, I mean, are there sort of utilities to help kind of ease that along to sync those passwords all up with your directory service?
That's a good question. As far as other services like the print server, that should just be tied into Active Directory.
Right.
So that should be the same password as their email, as their network access. You know,
right.
So, but it's the computer password that becomes the thorn in the side. So, you know, going back to talking about how these Macs are starting to become more and more like iOS devices. iOS devices can't be bound to directory service. And our users seem to understand that the credentials they use to log into the iPad are different than they use to log into their email. That seems to be okay. I'm not sure why that seems to be more of a struggle on the Mac, but it absolutely is. I've noticed that as well. What I've done in companies I've helped to switch to this model is provide training and user education to explain the differences between the passwords and what, you know, one password's for, what the other password's for, and that, you know, they have agency over this one password and this other password is, you know, kind of controlled by the domain controller. So I think user education, both in onboarding, is super important. I know it, again, not to make this a Jamf specific thing, but at Jamf, when you go through onboarding, you do have about a half day of orientation with IT where they sit down and walk you through how all this stuff works, no matter what your skill level is, no matter what your you know, comfort level is with using Macs and working in an environment that uses Macs. They go through all these things with you and make sure you really understand what's actually happening and what you need to know, and that gives you the ability to ask questions as the user. So I think designing an education program for users is probably the best way you can combat that.
So basically, I mean, the important part, like you were saying before, is that that's not a technology issue.
Right, that's not a technology issue.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. All right, so we'll get through this, I swear. The one last thing I want to see everyone get away from is installing all the things. I've worked with so many organizations that, you know, especially when imaging, we just want to build one big monolithic image and put all the software we have in it and deploy it to everyone. That way it's there, it's ready to go. I don't think this is a good approach because, it kind of comes from imaging, but I see this take over when people go into Agile Deployment. Their first instinct is, well, when we deploy the machine, let's just push all the software to it. I don't think that's the right approach because not every user is going to use every piece of software. Obviously, you're going to have some things that are required to be there, and you should absolutely push those. But really think long and hard about what has to be there and what's nice to have there. And if it's nice to have there, put it into a self-initiated installation portal for the user that they can pull the software from when they need it on their time, when it works for them, and you're not making them sit through lengthy installs of software they're not going to use. This also has the added benefit of making sure that all you have to do is put the updated application on your server so that when the user installs it, they're always getting the latest version, rather than pushing out an outdated version in your image because you haven't had the time to update your image recently. Especially when you start getting into tools like Auto Packager, where you can have these things automated and get the most recent versions of your software put up onto your server, it really cuts down on the time you have to spend maintaining your deployment. We have another question.
I just have one big asterisk to put at the end of this.
Sure.
None of this is applicable to regulatory or governmental environments.
Word.
That's probably correct. That is not a space I spend a lot of time working in. So, yeah, if you work in government or anything with regulatory requirements, you probably aren't going to be able to get away with some of these ideas. But again, that's not really a technology problem. That's a policy. I wouldn't say a problem, but that's a policy thing. It's politics. Exactly.
Politics and law.
Politics and law. And as we know, the law changes really quickly to keep up with technology, right? Yeah. So again, it's one of those things that's not really a technology problem. Unfortunately, yeah, you probably are bound to that, and that's a bummer, in my opinion. I think that's a real bummer, because things could be so much easier. So in the description of the session, I said I'm going to help you understand how to deal with all these rapid changes and how things are happening. So I want to give you a few resources that you can use to help better prepare for these changes that are coming. So first thing I think every MacAdmin should have is a developer account. And you may be thinking, why do I want a developer account? I'm not a developer. I don't plan to be a developer. But the big thing you get with a developer account is access to the betas. Anyone with a developer account right now has access to El Capitan. They have access to iOS 9. They even have access to watchOS 2. And if you get access to these things early, you can put them into your testing environment, try out your deployment methods, try out the software you're using, see what breaks, see what needs to change, see what works. You shouldn't be waiting for the general release of this software to start testing. If you're looking for good information on testing, Rich did a great session, I think it was just before this one, right, on virtualization. Check out that video if you didn't go to that session. I'm sure you're probably going to give us some knowledge now too.
Well, I was also going to add to the fact that put heat on your vendors to also start testing now.
Yes.
I have some vendors who are just like, you know what? We're just going to wait till it comes out and then we'll start supporting it. I was like, it took you 3 months the last time. That's not acceptable.
Yeah, and that's the thing. If you can't support the new OS when it's released or shortly thereafter because you have vendors that aren't supporting the new OS when it's released or shortly thereafter, it's time to start looking at new vendors. You know, if you're going to be committed to deploying and managing Apple devices, then you need to design a complete solution that includes your vendors that have that support. If you have a question, comment?
For those who are light on the budget,
yes.
Apple has changed gears a little bit in the last couple of years, and we're starting to get public betas.
Yes.
And today, Apple dropped El Capitan public beta and iOS 9.
Yes. So as mentioned, there are public betas now as well. So there's a public beta for El Capitan and iOS 9 if you're light on the budget. Also, if you're light on the budget, it's good to know that in the past, you had to sign up for a separate developer account for OS X and for iOS. This year, they've just changed it as of WWDC this year, which is last month, that it's now $99 for the whole thing. So for $99, that you should not have it. Was that what you were going to?
Yeah. That's
Okay. Give me a minute, Rich. Come on. Your organization should be able to spring $99 to ensure that you have the tools that you need to support these devices. But yes, if you're light on the budget, the public betas will also work, although I believe the developer program will give you a little bit more access to some behind-the-scenes things than the public betas will. Yeah, there's public betas of Configurator. Or no, sorry, developer betas, yes. That's what I said, right? Yeah, that's right. So that's the developer account. Just show of hands, who has a developer account? Cool. Who's going to go sign up for a developer account next week when they get back to their job? Like 2 people. All right. Yes, you can prevent these public betas using a config profile, which I would recommend. As much as I'm against telling the users they can't do things, I think having the users install public betas on production work machines is a bad idea. Yes, Rich.
One other thing you get with the developer account, which can help you out, is that especially if you have to provide software installers to folks at home and things like that, which they'll probably have Gatekeeper turned on. You can, through your developer account, you can gain access to the same installer signing certificates that other developers use, and thus your installer, just like that installer you got from your vendor, that will work for those folks with Gatekeeper.
That is an awesome point that I completely forgot about. So I'm adding that to my notes for the next time I give this talk. Thank you. It does also give you the ability to file bugs, which is good. For those of you complaining, oh, Apple has all these bugs, file bug reports. If you don't file it, you can't complain, right? Isn't that how it works? Voting. It's like voting. If you don't vote, you can't complain. So you still will, but that's okay. So kind of going with this theme of being prepared for what's coming. Apple is now making their WWDC videos open to the public. Anyone, developer account or not, can go to this link here at the bottom. This will be in that list of links I said I was going to put on my blog, and see any of the WWDC videos. The 3 I'd really like to highlight that I think everyone deploying Apple in the enterprise should look at is the keynote, where they really talk about what's coming just kind of in the user space of the OS, as well as a little bit under the hood. but also the platform state of the union and what's new in managing Apple's devices. These two talks are incredibly relevant to the work that we are all doing day in and day out, and they're going to tell you a lot of useful information. In fact, all the stuff where I said what's coming, the DEP stuff, the new stuff in El Capitan, that's where I got all this information, was just from these videos. And anyone can access these, so definitely check these out as soon as you can find the time to do so. So the other big resource I want to highlight is probably the most important resource we all have, the community. And I think we all know that because we're all here in this conference, and this is a great community. We all are very into sharing our knowledge, sharing our ideas, helping other people out. But once you go home, go back to your job next week, it's important to be able to keep in touch with these people. So I want to give you a few resources you can use to connect with other people doing the same job that you're doing on a regular basis. So some of you may know some of these tools, some of you may not. For starters, we've got a Slack team for MacAdmins. You can sign up for free. All you need is an email address at macadmins.org. If anybody would like, I have cards with the address on it I can put up here on the table at the end. This is a great, I think we have over 600 members as of today. 600 people, 600 Apple admins are in this team helping each other out. Tons of channels, specific interests. It's great. People have really been seeming to love it. I'm a big fan, so highly recommend this. But if Slack isn't your thing, there's also IRC. There's the OS X server channel on IRC, and there's a great write-up on AFP 548 on how to get started with IRC and how to get it set up. And you can also, if you want the best of both worlds, you can actually get Slack in your IRC client. There's instructions on Slack's helps page, so you can actually get everything in one client if you really want to go that way. But if you're not into the real-time chat, we've also got Twitter. Believe it or not, Twitter is actually a really big collaboration platform in the MacAdmin space. The hashtag MacAdmin, you probably want to keep an eye on most of the time. That's where a lot of people seem to be chatting. And then, of course, the PSU Mac is the hashtag specific to this conference that they've been kind of bludgeoning into your heads every time they get up and talk at the meals, which is a good thing. So these are some resources that you can use. Does anyone else have a resource they want to call out before I move on? The Mac Enterprise list? Yeah, absolutely. It still exists as a list. How can I access that list?
If you go to macenterprise.org,
okay.
you should be able to find the link to subscribe.
Cool. So if you go to macenterprise.org, you can subscribe to the Mac Enterprise list.
Yeah, it's all one word, macenterprise.org.
Cool. macenterprise.org. Any other resources people have that I didn't mention they want to call out?
IT Think Tank on Facebook.
IT Think Tank on Facebook. I didn't even know about that.
Yeah, Mike Dodge set that up.
Mike Dodge? Of course he did.
Of course he did.
So yeah, Mike Dodge set up IT Think Tank. That's a group, I assume?
Yeah.
It's a group on Facebook. Check that out. For those of you in the Bay Area, MacBrained as well. Really cool organization doing meetups every month. A lot of stuff on macbrained.org as well. Anyone, Bay Area or not, is welcome to come to macbrained.org and check out what's going on. So I do have one last thing I want to talk about before I shut up and get out of here. So I've been talking about the harbinger of change, the new MacBook, the 2015 MacBook. Just show of hands, who has one? Do you love it?
Absolutely.
You love it? Do you love it? So we got one love it, we got one Anybody else? Who is supporting these in their organization already? Rich, you are? A few more? Rich, since you've been so instrumental in helping me with my talk, would you like to talk a little bit about how that's going for you?
You need like a zillion adapters. I've had, when folks have requested it, the first thing I will usually check is if they have a Thunderbolt display. Then I will follow up with them and say if they want a quote for a new display. They will ask me why. I will tell them that the thing they want doesn't work with the thing they have. And half the time the conversation ends up with them getting a 13-inch Retina MacBook Pro. However, the other half of the time they're like, you know what? I'll just try it by itself. I won't hook it up to my display. We'll see how it goes.
Cool.
But yeah, the whole zillion adapters thing, that's a pain.
Yeah, that is a pain. How are you deploying those devices?
To go along with the zillion adapters, the USB Ethernet adapter from Apple, yes, it's USB 2.0, so that means it connects at a fantastic 100 megabit of speed for Ethernet. I boot to Deploy Studio. I run my thin imaging workflow on it that just deploys packages and scripts. At the other end, it's configured. It's ready to go. I'm treating it like my other machines.
Cool. But I'm sure you could see the value in an Agile deployment solution for these MacBooks.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm pretty, well, with the exception of them going through Setup Assistant, I'm not imaging the machine. I'm laying down those packages and scripts to configure it to my standard configuration. And then after that, I'm a big believer in, I don't want to touch your stuff. So I set it up, I get it to our common configuration, and then after that, it is yours. Do with it as you will.
Cool. So this has caused a lot of, I don't want to say anger, but a lot of discord in the MacAdmin community. There's a thread on Jamf Nation about this computer, and people are freaking out because you can't image it, you can't image it. Well, I mean, you can. Rich just kind of proved that. But even beyond that, if your big problem with the new MacBook is that you can't image it, I think you're missing the point of the new MacBook. There's a great interview with Phil Schiller where he talks at length about the new MacBook and what Apple's thought process was going into it. I'd like to play a short clip of that for you now just to give you some context about where I'm going with this.
What the design team first envisioned when we started working on MacBook was to say, if all we do is incremental, slight change, where's the excitement, where's the value of Apple pushing things forward? We need to take bold risks. And if people don't like it, well, they can keep buying the MacBook Air, they can keep buying the MacBook Pro, but why don't we design a product that's around this wireless world that has really no physical connection that you need. You can get by without ever needing that. Wouldn't that be a better world? And in doing that, we realized, yeah, but we do need to charge it, so let's go create this one port that can charge and be USB and be your video out. And that way, if you need to connect, you can. You're not giving that up. But this is really designed. And if you do that, how far can you push it? How thin can it get? How light can it get? How aggressive a design can it be? And I think if I'm in my job for one reason, because I'm a customer like all of you. I love these products. I love this company. I want this company to be the best Apple can ever be. And one of the ways it can be the best Apple can ever be is to take bold risks and try to think of new things that others aren't willing to do. I remember this is all the same mentality as I remember when we took out the floppy. Oh, and I'm sure many of you all do too. It's the exact same thinking. I sat in the room with friends of mine who worked at other companies in Texas and other places, and they literally said, "Oh my God, I'm so jealous. We can't do that. We can't do that. We can't take the risk because if the world is going to be risk adverse and doesn't want us to take away anything, then if Dell doesn't have a floppy but Toshiba does, they'll just buy the Toshiba. They're all the same, and except if you're missing one thing, no one will buy your stuff." You said you're so lucky. You make something where your customers give you the opportunity to try something in a completely different way, and they listen to you when they try it. And if you have to adjust and make an external drive for a couple of years, great, you'll do it, but you get to make that change and move on. That's the embodiment of this new MacBook, which is take a bold risk. Maybe some people will think it's not perfect for them yet, but for a surprising number of people, it's already their future laptop. The customer satisfaction is off the charts on it. Customer demand is great. Does anyone here have a new MacBook and love it? Yeah. So that's the Apple I want. I want an Apple that's bold and taking risks and trying new things and being aggressive.
And just to show you that there's nothing new under the sun, how many people remember the 2008 MacBook Air? How many people thought that was a giant pain in the rear? How many people just dealt? Yeah. Insert Air after whenever Phil says MacBook, and we've been here before 7 years ago, and the world didn't end.
Did you look at my slides before?
Did I step on your lines?
A little bit.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. We'll skip that part. That's fine. You covered it. It's covered. Let's get another question coming up.
More of a statement. I don't usually get up and open my mouth, so it's a bit of a risk for me.
I don't either, so this is new for me too.
I work in higher education.
Okay.
We deal with a wide variety of machines. We have a lot of users. We have a lot of accounts. We have a directory service. I listen to what you're saying, and I hear what you're saying, and I understand the context it comes from. It is largely not relevant in our institution. For example, the MacBook Air. It's a fine machine. The screen is gorgeous. It's a light, fast, nice little machine to tote around. It's very difficult for us to implement that in our environment. So that means that we won't necessarily be using it. And I get that, and I'm fine with that. Some of my coworkers have philosophical issues with the MacBook even existing. I don't go there. It doesn't matter to me. The thing that is of concern to us is Apple is saying to us, potentially, when we imagine things late at night when the lights are off, this is the direction we're going. And if we decide to go this direction, we're not good at responding to you and saying, we're going to change our mind. I still have lots of clients to support. I still have Ethernet connections. I still have lots of accounts. I still have directory services. For us, it's not an option just to say, oh, let's go wireless. Let everybody admin their own machine. Let people load the software they want. It doesn't work for us. And legally, regulatory-wise, it's not going to happen. And if Apple decides that's the direction they want to go, we're screwed. And it makes us very nervous, and it makes us very tense and stressed out. We do as thin a client imaging as we possibly can, and we install the absolute minimum of software on a machine to put it at a common reference platform. And we let our users install as much software as they humanly can, and we do everything we can to give them choices and options and allow them to configure their OS the way they want. But there's limits. And, you know, I understand where you're coming from, but there's a large chunk of the Mac community that just doesn't live where you do. And imaging will continue and deployment will continue to be a fact of life for us. And we have to come up with elegant solutions for an inelegant problem because Apple has chosen not to go that way. And that's where I'm coming from when I listen to you. And this is very helpful, and I listen to Phil up there, and I think, Phil, instead of asking the question, how many of you have your MacBooks and like them, why didn't you ask, does anybody have a problem with your MacBook? I mean, how many people out there have issues with this as a product? And that's the thing that Apple isn't necessarily so good at. Is here's our vision, take it or leave it. Thank you.
Thank you. That was actually really good stuff. Did you also read my next slides before the presentation? Because no, you brought up a really great point, is that Apple's telling us where they're going, and that's kind of where I'm going with this. I had a few more slides here. I think I'm going to skip them because we just kind of addressed all that. But you make a really good point in that Apple is changing the game. Apple is telling you this is where it's going. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying towards the beginning of my talk about, Apple's not necessarily the bug. The process in a lot of times is the bug. So, I'm certainly not saying that what people are doing today is wrong. I mean, I certainly understand that every environment is different. Every environment has their own requirements. But the reality of the situation is this is where Apple's heading. And the way I see it, you really have two choices, and that's find ways to make that work for you and find ways to get on board with that, or become irrelevant and fall by the wayside, and that's how you end up getting stuck with older machines that can still do the old things you need to do. And to me, that's not a very good solution. So, unfortunately, there's no easy answer to what you just brought up. There really isn't. I know it's impossible to just go back next week and say, okay, we're changing everything. We're going to start doing it the new way. It's not a reality. None of us live in that world, and I wish we did. But these are things you should start to think about, because these are things that are going to become the norm in the coming years, and this is going to be the way forward, I think, based on what Apple's telling us. So it looks like we have a another question. I'm sure we have a few more, so I'm just going to skip a couple slides here, if I can, skip these builds. Why did I put builds in? So, talking about stuff. Some more miles there, imaging's dead, blah, blah. Okay, just want to thank a few folks. I'm not going to thank them all by name because I only have 6 minutes left, 5 minutes left. I want to leave enough time for questions as we can. So if your name's on here, thank you very much. What questions do you have? Let's talk. Seems like we got one right here. So.
Well, I was going to bring up a counterpoint. Even though I live in a regulatory environment, one of the things that seems clear to me is that it's not just Apple, but I think Apple is anticipating a major trend away from a former approach. I'd like to use the word paradigm, a former paradigm of what our jobs are as system administrators and what our environments were. And we keep clinging on to that older paradigm, hoping that by complaining, bitching, moaning, and so on and so forth, that it will stop. And it's not. It seems clear to me that what Apple is indicating, the more I think about it, is that these computational devices, they're almost disposable. I mean, what they do is they provide an insight into data, and we can argue whether or not the data where the data belongs and where the computational power belongs. And I think they're right; it should belong local. But the idea of us trying to manage that environment anymore is almost anathema to the direction that the entire computer industry is going, which is having information available wherever we are through whatever portal that we have available to us to get at and do our work. And the more further away we can get out of the way of the user doing that, the better and more productive the users will be. So I tend towards being very empathetic to what you were saying. And I'm stuck in an environment where nobody's really trying to plan for that vision. But I think it's a vision that we all need to start planning for and imagining, therefore, reimagining, therefore, what our jobs are, which isn't so much tamping down on and controlling everything in the user experience. It may be actually facilitating the user and improving their experience when they pick up a computer and try to get their jobs done. So that's my thought. Thanks.
Thank you. That was awesome. I could not have said that better myself. In fact, you should give this talk next time. That was awesome. Yeah, that's great. Yes.
The whole thing that he just said, phone.
Yeah.
They don't use their computers anymore.
Yeah. Yes. Phones and iPads.
They're using their phone.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we've got 3 minutes left. Does anyone else have question, concern, comment? Looks like we got one coming up here. You've got 2 minutes. Should have put one of those in the back too. That would have been a good idea.
This is great. I love how lively it's been with the discussion.
Yes, it's been fun.
I just had a quick question about the setup assistant. So one of the big roadblocks for us in our environment, higher education, to rolling out DEP, like you've outlined here, is that we rely pretty heavily on Migration Assistant right now. We have a lot of student workers. They go out and help the user migrate their data. We're kind of looking into Crash Plan to kind of automate some of that as well. But so two problems with that. There are the users that don't have the technical ability to actually connect their computers, and so they can't finish that whole setup process without an assist from one of our tech staff. Second issue is if we eventually implement Crash Plan, is it possible to turn off that part of the setup assistant so that they're not prompted for migrating data and messing everything up?
So the first part of your question is, I forget which one came first, but turning off setup assistant, turning off the migration assistant and setup assistant, yes, you can turn that off through DEP. And the other question about Crash Plan, automating that process, that can also be done, yes.
Cool, thank you.
So looks like we've got 30 seconds. We have one more question.
Two quick things.
They can
improve the MacBook by adding a second port, because one port really isn't enough.
Which is how they improved the MacBook Air.
Exactly. So
Yes.
we're looking forward to that. And my question to you is how do you see people that have to deal with PCI compliance in your world of non-imaging setup and deployment?
That's a really loaded question. I have 5 seconds to answer it.
I apologize.
So I think the answer to that question is I don't.
Okay.
I don't run into a lot of that in the organizations that I work with because most of the PCI compliance is on the server side and not necessarily on the end user machines. So I'm out of time. Thank you all so much for coming and having this discussion with me. I'll be around tonight, dinner and afterwards if anyone wants to grab me and have this discussion further. But I will be leaving and not around tomorrow. So if you do want to grab me and talk, tonight's the night. So thank you very much.